All right. Okay, everyone, we are live. Good. All right. So we will continue. This is the Thursday night class. We're continuing where we left off in this discourse. We had already two weeks. We're learning about Moshe striking the rock. We're learning about why God got so upset, why Hashem got so upset that Moshe struck the rock, even though Hashem kind of led him. It was a lead up because Hashem told him to take a stick. If Hashem wants him to talk, why is he telling him to take a stick? So we were discussing all this on the deep inner level, outside of the, to understand it all as it relates to the spiritual dynamics of things, to the inside, to the neshama of it, to the soul of it. The idea is that the concept of the rock and the water coming from the rock is to be able to pull out from the rock is a metaphor for the soul, and the water from the rock is to be able to pull out the love of the soul. A soul is full of love and full of potential love, and love over here we're talking about a powerful love to Hashem, to the infinite being, where the soul yearns for God, and that love is just like in a rock. There is fire inside. It's interesting. We in the discourse we're interchanging water with fire, because we know that when you hit a rock, when you hit stones one another, fire comes out, and that's called a tzur. Tzur is a flint stone, a stone that has the potential to produce fire. So the question over here is, what does it take to bring the water out of the rock? What that really means is that when our souls were in heaven, our souls were naturally, before they come down in a body, because we all have a history before we come into a physical incarnation, when our souls are in the spiritual worlds above, our souls are deeply attached. We might say that our souls are constantly in a trance. They're so completely mesmerized by the beauty of the infinite, of the Ein Sof, because they can see the godly flow that flows into all the spiritual worlds, which we know that our world is a little joke, a little crumb of a crumb of a crumb of the true vastness of what really is out there in terms of the spiritual cosmos. And the soul gets to see how all of that is a product of the most greatest artist, of the infinite being who creates it all. So the soul is dazzled by that, and therefore the soul is in a state of constant yearning and attachment to God, to the Ein Sof. That's the soul when it's in heaven. When the soul comes down in the body, the physicality of the body obscures and hides and conceals that spiritual quality of the soul. So we're not necessarily conscious of a spiritual yearning. And a lot of times our life can become completely just about the body, and we completely forget that there is a soul and a deeper self. So the question is, how do you bring the waters of the soul back out? How do you draw forth either the fire or the water? So there are two levels in a person's life. There is a state of immaturity, which is when a person is trying to get a grip over themselves in the early stages of their spiritual development, where the body and the concealments of the material world are still very, very much in place. So we're struggling very hard to get even a tiny little bit of a peak of something beyond, of something higher. And it's not easy, so it takes a lot of effort. Then sometimes we have to utilize the method of hitting the rock. And what that means is we have to employ a little bit of a harshness with ourselves. Sometimes we need to be a little harsh with ourselves. A harshness of ourselves is to help drill a hole in the thick, dense layer of the self, of the ego, that is not allowing the spiritual juices that are deep, deep, deep and are deep, deep embedded in the essence of our soul to come forth. It's like when you're looking for water and they want to, in a place in a desert, they take these huge, huge drills and they drill through the crust of the earth. There's a lot of drilling to do to go through the rock. Same idea is that sometimes you need a method which is a little bit tough. And that has to do with a little bit of a breaking of the outside to release the inside. However, once there is a certain development, a maturity in life, and that is when the soul is able to gain mastery and come forth and reveal itself, our spiritual higher self is able to overpower the material, earthy, immediate, self that is very, very just sees life just as the material world. And once we can kind of like establish already a certain dominance of spirit over matter, neshama, the soul over the guf, and then a person has already a kind of a firm standing as a spiritual being, as a being that is attached to Hashem, seeking higher. Even then, not always do our juices flow. Even then, there is work that needs to be done, but then you can talk, you can communicate. And it says that when Moshe hit the rock, Hashem's the Midrash tells us that God says, "Why are you hitting it? You should have spoken to it. You should have said words of Torah. You should have said one chapter of Mishnah. You should have just spoke some Mishnah to the soul. To the rock, and the rock would have given the water. You should the words of the Midrash is Shana Olav Perek Echad. You should just repeat. You should have studied over the rock one chapter of Mishnah, and when you studied one chapter of Mishnah, you would have had the effect of bringing the water out. So what does that mean? What that means is like this: the true when we say being to be a spiritual being and to discover a higher calling and a higher thirst and a higher longing in life, so there's layers and levels and levels and levels upon that as well. One can appreciate spirituality and godliness and seek a connection, but it's to a very, very limited level of Hashem, to a very low level of godliness, the godliness that is the power in the universe, the power of creation. But then there is a much deeper and higher understanding, where the soul is able to peak and understand and appreciate the infinity of God, God's utter transcendence of all worlds, of all levels. And on that level, and obviously we're talking about things that are like, wow, but we had tzaddikim, righteous people, who felt this energy, felt this literally every day. They would wake up with this desire. And it's a desire that nothing in the world can even compare to. There is no passion and there's no yearning that can ever compare to that. And what is that? It's because the soul senses the utter infinity of God, which in front of him, all of existence, everything that exists is all nothing, literally nothing. And as a result of that, the soul wants to abandon everything. The person feels such a yearning, or they just want to let go of everything they're attached to and have their soul melt into the Ein Sof, into the infinite. It can reach a point where a person's life isn't even in danger. We find that there were people like that, like the two sons of Aaron HaKohen. They passed away. The first day the temple was open for business, the Mishkan was open for business, it says Nadav and Avihu took fire and they went in. And what happened? They weren't punished. They just experienced a longing, a desire, a thirst, and a passion for oneness with the infinite that they couldn't handle that in their bodies. So their soul took flight. So the question is, like, what feeds that? That's something like, in order to feed that, in order for us who live in time and space, we live in the physical world, and we live in real time and space, to be able to sense the reality, the truth of the infinite, that's not only above our world, but above all worlds. Worlds go on and on and on and on and on, but to be able to sense the truth of the Ein Sof and to really feel it, so much so that you're being pulled with like a magnetic pull, like a fire being pulled to its source. So what stimulates that, or what awakens that, is that you need to bring yourself a little piece of infinity. In other words, when you get a little, it's like a little taste of tequila. It's like if you take a little bit and you drink it, you have a little l'chaim, a little something of that, then you can yearn for it. So where is God's infinity contained? Where is it present? So God concentrated his infinity into the Torah. So when a person takes a little sip of Torah and they've already enabled that their soul masters their body. You see, as long as the soul is buried under the heap of materialistic pursuits, then you're not sensitive. So even if you drink a lot of Torah, it's not going to help. Because you're learning Torah. So you're learning a Mishnah. It discusses the laws of Shabbat. It discusses the laws of Kashrut. It discusses the laws of this, the laws of, it's like, what is that? That feels so... It feels just like rules and regulations. You don't feel and sense and open it up to sense the infinite light that is contained in it. But if a person has already refined their body and seasoned themselves with spirituality and reached the point already that the body and the earthiness is no more clogging their sensitivities, so then all you need is, it's like a little fire burning, and sometimes you want to like get it like this. So you take a little kerosene and you throw it on the fire. Suddenly, the fire flares up. So the kerosene to the soul is a chapter of Mishnah. So that's only when someone has reached a level of maturity. So that's why Moshe's sin was a very big sin, because when Moshe went and he slammed the rock, instead of talking to the rock, it was because he underestimated the state of the level of spirituality that the Jewish people had already attained. Because in the beginning of the 40 years, in the first, when initially, when they came out of Egypt, the Jews were still in a very, very immature state. And in that level, then he had to really hit the rock. Because the story is repeated in the Torah. I'm just going to conclude this point so that you have a full thought. Because initially, when they went out of Egypt, they asked for water. They didn't have water, and Hashem told Moshe, "You should hit the rock." And he hit, and it was nothing wrong. It was good, and he brought them water. 40 years later, they lost their water source, and they asked for water. And this time Hashem tells Moshe and Aaron to take the stick and talk to the rock. So Moshe and Aaron goes out and and they go there to talk to the rock, but they got confused, and in the end they took and they struck the rock. So the question is, they did what they did 40 years ago, and then it was okay. Now it's not okay. So if you take a look, we learned something very interesting. The same rock, when the Torah speaks about it the first time, it calls it a tzur, like tzur Yisroel, like the strong. Tzur means a rock. 40 years later, the Torah talks about the same story, but it's referred to as a selah. The difference between a tzur and a selah is a tzur only gives water if you hit it. A selah you can talk to. So since they were already in the desert for 40 years, and they've already learned they've already they've already drawn their neshama out, their soul out, developed it through so much spiritual exercise. They did meditation and spiritual yoga for 40 years. So now they were already in a complete different headspace. All they needed at this point was just a little sizzler, something to sizzle, something to flare it up. So Moshe had to speak to the rock. And by the fact that he hit it, means here's interesting. the way the leader thinks of you, it's such an important thing. The way you think of your students or the way you think of the people that follow you, then they believe how you relate to them. If it's with children that way. If you treat them like on a higher level and you see them on a more higher level, they will live up to that higher level. But if you communicate with them on a lower level, then they will start believing that that's who they are. And then they won't. So by Moshe hitting the rock, he completely diminished the collective consciousness of the Jewish people by basically lowering them to a place where they still need to be beaten, a spiritual kind of beating, but a beating in order to bring out their water. And that's what we were learning. That's a summary. That's all of this in a nutshell. Now we can actually go learn it inside, but I gave you a little synopsis. That's why he didn't enter the land of Israel. Yes. Yeah.
If they were lacking their water, it means that they were in a eureka, on some level.
Yeah, but the way he refers to it is in the Mimer is when before a person, as long as the nefesh bahamis and the nefesh, a person is still behislapshus in the nefesh in the guf and the nefesh bahamis, then you need to draw. But once a person is already past the hislapshus of the guf and nefesh bahamis, they're not melubish in it, they're not enclosed in it, they're already above it. But you still need something to be mo'oider the oirin seif. You still need a Maimer Chassidus. You still need something to sizzle it, and so you always need a certain. They needed some Torah. That's right. They needed a little spark. Thank you. Just a little taste. Yes. Okay. Okay. So this is where we were holding last week. A middle of the piece, tough nun zayin. V'zeu inyan hafrish. Okay, tough nun zayin. In middle, that's the second page of the mimer. V'zeu inyan hafrish, and this is the difference between tzur l'sala, between a tzur and a sela. A tzur is a hard rock, and a sela is a softer rock. Shebchinas tzur, the level called tzur. Now, by the way, these two levels, as we learned last week, is also the difference of being. He calls the soul. Remember, we learned last week that a soul is called the daughter, and it's also called the wife, the bride. Remember that. So, when a soul is not yet opened up, when the soul is not yet opened up, it's still in its youth, as he refers to like in next week in the Torah portion. Binoreha beis aviha, in her youth when she's in her father's house. So that means she's still in a youthful state. That means the soul. See, our souls are always naturally inclined to seek out godliness, to seek out a relationship, to yearn, because we have a Jewish soul. And the Jewish soul senses that there's something beyond. It wants something deeper. It's looking. It's seeking. It's instinctive. But it's still, and last week we learned, if you remember, it's perceiving the backside of God. As it says, Lechtech acharai, you walked behind me in the desert. It means you're seeing my backside. You're not seeing my front. And when we're seeing the back of God means we're perceiving God only we're seeing God as the source of creation, but we're not really, really in tune for who he really is to himself. We're seeing what he is showing to the world. And what God is showing to the world is a very, very, very superficial element of his being. And as long as our love to him is because, like he said, we learned last week the verse, I am loving you because you're the source of my life. Like we say, that's the idea of a child to a parent. Why do you love your parent? Because the parent gives you life and supports you, gave you a home and supported you and teach it. And when you need someone to help you and someone to turn to, you turn to your father, you turn to your mother. So there is a support system. They're supporting you. So your love to them is not because you want to lose yourself in their world. They're here to support your life. When you get married, the deeper idea of a marriage is to two become one, which means, at least what it means is that the woman wants to lose herself in her husband's Okay, now in today's world it's a little hard to imagine that because there is a certain equality between the man and the woman's stature. And that has to do with Mashiach as well, because Mashiach's world, the woman's energy will rise even higher than the husband. But when we look at the general traditional way of seeing things, the man represents the influencer and the woman is the recipient. So in that case, the recipient wants not to receive, the deeper love, the love of marriage means, I don't want to receive from you, I want to be you. I want to transcend myself and get lost in your world, in your reality. That's the meaning. Like, if you think about it, Chava, Eve, was initially part of Adam and Adam. And then Hashem took Chava and he separated her and he made her into a separate person. And then God says to Chava, you will yearn for your husband. What does that mean? Because she wants to go back into him. And when they get married, they come face to face. That's what it really means. Face to face is that her yearning is to know him, not him only as he supports her, but him to take her into his inside world. Now, with humans, we don't always see the value of that. But if you're getting married to God, we can understand the value. To enter into God's world means to be infinitely beyond the limitations of time and space and what make up our existence, but to become part of God. That's a much higher understanding and a much deeper appreciation. It's one where a person is willing to relinquish everything in life. I don't need anything. I don't want anything. I don't want any of the temporal pleasures of time and space. Whatever you're going to give me is meaningless. I want one thing. I want to bond with the infinite. And that's called maturity, and that's called becoming a wife. That's what we learned earlier. So these two levels of being a daughter versus moving to a level of becoming a kala, becoming the bride. And the word bride in Hebrew is from the word kala. Kala means expiration. Meloshin kilayon. In other words, like something expiring. Or kol sanafshi. Kol sanafshi means I feel like I'm burning. I'm dissolving. I'm pulling I just want to melt into you. It's something we should get comfortable with because we're going to feel it very strongly once Mashiach is here. It's going to be very hard for us to remain in our bodies. That's how intense it's going to be. Because we did Torah and mitzvot, we're going to anchor ourselves down, but it's going to be really intense. Because suddenly our spiritual souls are going to, the physical is going to become so refined, it's going to allow for the souls to express themselves. And it's going to be boom, it's going to be really intense. So we should, at least today's days, at least we should get comfortable with the idea. And then we will feel it. But that state of being in a state of kala, that's this called face-to-face versus following the back. So he says the initial state, so corresponding to the state of being a daughter versus being a wife, corresponding to that are the two stages of Tzur and Selah. Tzur is the hard rock, and although it has a love, but its love to God is a superficial love, because it's superficial, meaning it's not the truest love of the soul that wants God for what God is. It wants Hashem only in as much as God supports us. I want to connect you, God, because I hope you'll give me livelihood, you'll take care of me. That's good, but that's a very, 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 very limited relationship. It's like someone marries the most brilliant person, the most capable person, the most talented person, the most wealthiest person, the most educated person, the kindest person, the most compassionate person. Imagine marrying someone who's the most of everything. And the girl is so simple that she's happy that he gives her an apartment and he buys her food. And she loves her husband because that's what he does. She doesn't know that she's married to a billion Einsteins, and that she's married to the greatest sage of sages, and that she's married to the person who's curing cancer, and that he's healing the world, and that he's imagine being and she doesn't appreciate any of that. All she knows, she could have been married to any Joe Schmo. Could have done the same thing. So when you're getting married to God and you're loving God because he's sustaining time and space, is ridiculous. Even if you're thinking about him sustaining all of time and space. Because that's not who he is, that he's sustaining time and space. Time and space is nothing to him. But our souls deep inside are capable to loving and appreciating God for what God is. And that kind of love is a complete different type of a love. The quality of the love. Remember, we learned last week that the love of a child to a father, to a parent, is a calm love. It's not fiery. Because the calmness means I love you because I'm calm, because what's calm? Calmness comes from content. You're content. You're satisfied. You're not frustrated. You're satisfied. Now, the love element means I'm loving because I feel that my happiness and my contentness is attributed to you. So you're supporting. So I'm so comfortable, like the child is so comfortable in the parent's lap. I feel like my support system is here. But the love of a man and a woman, and everything is metaphoric, which means God created this type of love of a man and a woman, of a husband and a wife, of a bride and a groom. God created it as a reflection of the deeper bond that he wants to have with us. So when you have this love, it's fiery, it's passionate, it can become very intense. And what's the fire? The nature of fire is that it's leaping. It's fire. Fire is, why is fire jumping? It's restless. It's dancing. It's all over the place. Because the fire, you can tell in the fire, if you had a conversation with the fire, if the fire would be able to talk, it would say to you that it feels it doesn't want to be here. That's why it's leaping. It's leaping up towards the sky. You can almost hear the fire saying, I want to be in the sky. I don't want to be here. So that's, and why is it between a man and a woman? Because a woman and a man are different from each other. And therefore, I feel that I want to know you and I want to attach myself to you, but you're so different than me. You're so far from me. There is such a distance, and I want to break that distance and leap over that distance so that I can be one with you. That's the fire. So the fire is, get me out of here. I want to be there. So when the soul feels that being a time-space bound creature is so limiting and so confining, and we have an invitation to become one with that which is infinite and boundless, boy, oh boy, does that create a yearning. And that's the love of fire. That's the marriage element. The question is, however, how do you bring, we all have the potential, and that's the state of tzur. Tzur is, like we learned last week, a rock that has fire inside of it, but the fire is hidden in it. How do you bring it out? And that's what we're going to learn. You have to hit it or you have to talk it. So I've already given you the nutshell. Now let's learn it as he explains it according to Kabbalah and he's going to give us a lot more. This is like the outline of the painting. Now we're going to fill it in with all the colors and all the strokes to make it really rich. That's basically what we're going to learn now. And this is the Indian average. This is the difference between sort of the sala, between the hard rock and the sala, which is a softer rock. The state of tzur, is the concept of following me in the desert. This is considered the love of youth. Beis Avia, when she's still in the father's house, which means we're still daddy's girl. We love daddy, we love our dad, we love our Abba, we love because he's our father. Shenikru tzur, and on a collective level, the Jewish people were in that state. Takef achamat and Torah, right after they received the Torah, but they haven't yet seasoned, they haven't yet marinated in the Torah. The Torah helps us develop. Because that was just immediately after the giving of the Torah, they have not yet learned how to truly relate to God. It didn't hit them yet. They didn't realize that they were sent an invitation to connect to God, who God really is. They had a very, very narrow, limited understanding. But at the end of the 40 years, when Moshe, the second time Moshe was told to talk to the rock, which at the end of the 40 years, it says in the pasuk, it says in the verse, God has not given you a heart to know until this day. God has not given you a heart to know me until this day. Then it is called a selah. Suddenly, it's different. They're no more a tzur, a hard rock. They're a selah. Shu'ava de b'chinas kala. This is the love of a kala. This is the love of a bride. The Inyan who, and what is the idea? And we learned these lines already last week. I just wanted to, just a little bit. The Hine ksiv, it says, V'samticha b'nikras atzur. God says to Moshe, I will put you in the cleft of a rock. And last week I didn't explain what the connection is. When did God say this to Moshe? That I will put you in a crack of the rock. It was after the Jewish people sinned with the golden calf. So Hashem tells Moshe, and Moshe says, show me your face. So God says to Moshe, you can't see my face. You can only see my back. And in order for me to protect you, I'm going to pass by, but in order for you to be protected, I'm going to put you in a rock. I'm going to cover it with my hand. And then once I pass by, I'm going to remove my hand and you're going to see my back, not my front, whatever that means. Okay? But why was God telling that to Moshe? I'm going to put you in the rock. Because the Jewish people had just sinned with the biggest sin. And Moshe was trying to figure out how he can still gain God's love. How can he repair the sin? And Moshe had reached at a certain point, even though Moshe was fighting, but Moshe really didn't understand how it's repairable. He knew because he loved him so much that he put his foot down and demanded that God forgive them. But he himself didn't understand how the forgiveness will come. For that, God had to show him the rock. What God was basically showing Moshe was, go into the crack of the rock. It means I want you to see what's going on inside the soul. Because when you're looking at it, you're not seeing the fire, you're seeing the cold stone. In other words, you've given up on the soul of a Jew. You think that if Jews are not keeping mitzvot or they're not keeping Shabbat, they're chilonim. They're chol. Chol means mundane. They're not kadosh. They're not holy. There's no such a thing as a Jew that's not holy. Like the Rebbe always said, there's no such a thing as a Jew as a chiloni. He thinks he's chiloni. A Jew is holy. Vayavdil Hashem, God separated the Jewish people to be kodesh kadashim, to be holy of holies. What does that mean? You can't extinguish God from the soul. It's just, sometimes they're conscious of it. Sometimes it's inside, it's buried inside. So Hashem had to show Moshe, go into the Nikra Satsur after the sin of the golden calf. And that's how I can forgive them. Because I know that that they can never, ever, ever break their bond with me. Because even if on the outside, it seems like they've abandoned me and looked and gone off with someone else, that's not real. It never is real. It's like in a relationship. In a relationship, it's a problem in our human relationships. But if a couple know that even if God forbid there was a breach in their relationship, it never was real, then there could be forgiveness. Because the real connection, there's a much deeper connection that's always there that is unbreakable. So that's where Hashem, but that's called sur. Sur is when the fire is hidden. He said, when you strike a stone on another stone, the fire comes out. But before the fire comes out, the fire was in a concealed state inside the rock. It's the source of the fire that goes out afterwards, but now it's hidden. This will be understood b'nefesh adam, in a person's soul. Now we'll understand, what does this mean in our own souls? The fire that's inside the rock. There's a potential love. There is a hidden love, a concealed love. That every Jewish person, man or woman, every single soul has a love, a fiery love to connect to God. But it's still concealed. It has to be awakened to draw it forth from the concealment to the revelation. Good. And that's the difference between, but a Selah is a person's whose soul is more on the surface. The fire is already more available. The tzur, the fire, is buried very, very deep. In the Selah, it's more, you need to just give it a little awakening and the fire comes out. Now he's going to explain it Cabalistically. Cabalistically, it's as follows. In the book of Pardes, which is a book of the Ramak, Ramosha Kerdovo, the great Kabbalist before the Ari, from Tzvat. So he has a book where he has like a dictionary on Kabbalah. So over there he explains that there is an insert on the word tzur. He explains, what does tzur mean? He explains all these people and objects and entities, what's their spiritual Cabalistic meaning? For instance, you'll have an entry on the word tzvi, which means a deer. What is a deer? What does it represent in the divine realm? Then you'll have an entry on the word, I don't know, let's buy it. What is a house? What does it mean spiritually in the higher worlds, in the reality, on a deeper level? What is this? What is that? What is a tree? What is an elan? So we all know everything has a source in the sphirot, in the attributes. So over there, he speaks about tsur. What is a tsur, a rock? Because in the Torah, we have a story about a rock. What is a tsur? And he says, Pirish tsur b'malchus. That tsur, Kabbalistically, is in the attribute of malchut, which is the last of the 10 sefirot. Malchus. Malchus is the sphira, the attribute that is the source of the world. Because how does God create the world? By being a king over it. Now, we understand just on a very simple level, a king can only be a king if he has a community. If he has a people. Without a people, you don't have a king. So the level of Malchus is God very, very much vested into the universe. It's God's presence in the world. So now hold that. You see, if that's Tzur, now the soul mimics God, because the soul is a little piece of God. So if in the godly realm, Tzur means Malchut, which Malchut is not the godliness that's above the world, higher than the world, but the Malchut is the energy of Hashem that's embedded in the world. So what would then be the corresponding Tzur in the human soul? The part of the soul that's embedded in our bodies and in our physical consciousness. In other words, the part of the soul that's blocked by time and space and by the physical world. And for that reason, it's distracted by time and space and by everything around us, failing to see the infinite. And therefore, it might need a little banging in order to like get out of its drunkenness and sober up and realize, hey, I'm a soul and I have a capacity to bond with God. And God sent me an invitation, and our wedding is in a week from now, and I'm busy, and I haven't even prepared for the wedding. You think about it, it's a real true example, because our wedding with God is going to happen at any moment when Mashiach comes. And if we're busy with everything else but thinking about our wedding dress, this is what we should really be doing now. We shouldn't be distracted by anything else. But because we are so blocked, and why are we blocked? Because our souls are vested in our body and our animal consciousness. So we don't see. So spiritually, if you trace the same power, but in God also, see, God is not only the source of our strengths, he's also the source of our weaknesses. That means in order to create a possibility for a weakness, God has to kind of make that weakness inside of himself, or else it wouldn't even exist. So if there's darkness in the world, God has to make darkness inside of himself. If there is pain in the world, there has to be pain inside of him. So if there is a condition where the souls are obscured and blocked and don't have expansive vision and to see reality for what it really is, but only a very narrow, constricted vision, that's because there is an attribute of Malchut which it becomes constricted in the world. So he says, the Ramak says Tzur is Malchus. Upirisheni, and there's a second Pirush in the Ramak who elevates the Tzur and says the Tzur is, I said Nevuah today, Yassi.
Yeah.
Someone was here today, and they said that they came to me because they wanted to assure that that after 120, they'll know, their husband will know who to call, the whole story. They said they spoke to this organization in New York, and they gave her a number who to call. So I said, let me guess who they gave you the number who to call. She took out her phone to look for the name. She said, Yossi. And I said, the second name. So she couldn't believe it. I said, what are you talking about? He's going to be here tonight by the class. She says, you know. So it was funny. In any case, someone wanted to talk to me. The whole discussion was that she wants to assure that when her time comes, she has connections. I said, with me, you have the best connections. In any case, Upirush Sheni, the second Pirush on, there is a copy here. Upirush Sheni, and the second Pirush of where Tzur is, what the level of Tzur is b'teferes. That means that that when we say Tzur, the concept of Tzur is in the attribute called Teferes. Now, Teferes is much higher than Malchus. Teferes is what? Teferes is in the masculine attributes, which is much higher than Malchus, which is much, right? Fine. What's Sela? Now remember, we're learning the whole time that Sela is higher than Tzur. Tzur is a immature soul, and Sela is a mature soul. Right? So Cabalistically, you have to say the same thing, that Sela is a much higher than so if we're looking in the realms of the divine, Sela must be higher than Tzur. So the Tzemach Tzedek says like this. According to the first explanation that Tzur is in Malchus, so what is Sela? Sela is also in Malchus. Hold it, but if they're both in Malchus, what's the difference? No, there are two levels of Malchut. There's the lower level of Malchut, which Malchus descends into the world, like we say in Ashrei, Malchuscha Malchus Kol Olamim. Your kingship is the kingship of all worlds. That's when Malchus descends into the creation to create. It's like a soul going down into the body and being infused in the body. And as a result of that, to a certain degree, being blocked by the body. So that's the lower level of Malchus. But then there is a higher level of Malchus, where Malchus is still attached. It says in Chassidus, Malchus is still above all worlds. She is unified still with her husband in Atzilus. Atzilus is the world of divinity prior to our world, prior to all worlds. So there is two levels in Malchus. Malchus as she becomes the source of creation, and Malchus when she's the... Because we've learned this many times, from the 10 Sefirot, what is the point of the 10 Sefirot? The 10 Sefirot act, if we would learn today in the Elokus channel, we have a new class that we're learning called the Elokus channel. So there today we were learning about the whole concept of the Sefirot. What do the Sefirot serve? They serve as a mediator between the infinite light of God and the world. So every Sephira takes God's light and makes it more adjusted to the creation. Malchus, being the last Sephira, adjusts Hashem's light, filters the light to be ready to become a source for the finite world. But in Malchus itself, there are two levels. There's one level in Malchus where she's the bowl, receiving all the light from higher, but she's still above creation. The next level of Malchus is when she turns around and she starts to descend into the world to sustain and to create. When she comes down to sustain and to create, she's much, much lower than when she's up in Atzilus receiving from her husband. Okay, these are the two powers that we once learned we learned it many times, that's a difference called Zanav la'aroyos and Rosh l'shi'ulim. The sages say you should always try to be a tail of a lion rather being the head of a fox. It's better to be the tail of a lion than to be the head of the fox. So in Kabbalah and Chassidus it says that's both referring to Malchus. When Malchus comes down to create the finite worlds, she's the head, but she's the head of the fox. When she's still attached in Atzilus, she's the tail. She's the last level, but she's the tail of a lion, which is infinitely higher. So, the two names Tzur and Sela, Tsur is the Malchut when it goes down to sustain the world. Sela is Malchus when she's still in Atzilus. When she's still in Atzilus, she's called Kalas Moshe, the bride of Moshe. Like it says in the Pasuk, Vayhi biyoim Kalos Moshe. It was on the day when Moshe finished erecting the Mishkan. But according to the sages, the word Kalas Moshe also means Moshe's bride. What does that mean? Moshe is the divine light of Atzilus. His bride is the one who's receiving the light. Moshe is the masculine light, the innermost of the masculinity of the world of Atzilus. Moshe is Vanachnu Ma, is the name of 45, which is the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei. It's the pure divine light that's flowing through the world of Atzilus. The pnimius of the light of Atzilus is the light of Chachma. Moshe is Koach Ma. He says about himself, Vanachnu Ma. So the energies of Atzilus are the innermost energy of Atzilus, because we know in Atzilus there's Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, everybody. But Moshe is the most inner, deepest light of Atzilus. Kalas Moshe is the Malchus, the Shekhinah, when she's still receiving from Moshe, when she's still much higher. That's when she's called Selah. That's what it says in Pardes. So let's read it inside. That's, however, if we say that Tsur is in Malchut, then Selah is also in Malchus, but a much higher level of Malchus. If we say that Tsur is in Tiferes, then Selah has to be higher. He's going to explain in a moment. Selah is in Bina, which Bina is the mother of Tiferes, which is much higher. Chachma, Bina, Das, 3 intellectual faculties, and then there are 7 emotional faculties. Tiferes is the center of the emotions, of the divine emotions. But compared to the divine intelligence, it's much, much lower. So the general idea that he's trying to explain over here is that what? That a Tsur is a much lower level than a Selah. Now the concept, however, is as follows. It's going to be the same concept, but according to the 2 interpretations, it's both the same concept, conveying the same message, but on 2 different levels. In other words, instead of this being the 1st floor and the 2nd floor, it's going to be the 4th floor and the 5th floor. But it's the same idea. But it's not even a higher floor. The difference is huge. Why? Because as follows. Malchus that goes down into creation means it's limited. It's constricted with the constrictions of time and space. That's creation. Creation is limited. Malchus, as it is in Atzilus, is Ein Sof. It's infinite. So the difference between the two is unmeasurable. This is above the darkness, above the stratosphere, and this is below the stratosphere. It's a whole. This is within the pull of gravity, and this is above. This is in outer space. This is way above. Understand? It's a major difference. So, in the soul, corresponding the soul, the part of our soul that struggles with the darkness of our body and the darkness of our ego and animal soul, that's the lower part of the malchus of our soul. The deeper part of our neshama that is higher and above the darkness, which sadly most of us never get to experience because it's transcendental and it takes a lot of work to be able to introduce that higher level of we all have it, but in order to open up our consciousness to that level of insight and that level of understanding and that level of awareness is not easy. It takes a lot of subduing of the body, subduing the material desires and wants of the body. A lot of self-restraint and a lot of training. Because when the body gets whatever it wants, the consciousness becomes very thick but when you don't give your body what it wants and you train it to serve God and you make God's will more important, the body becomes less of a distraction. And the more you can open up to your soul. So, if the if the Sela element of our soul is the God, is the Malchut that goes down into creation, but we said the Tzur, I'm sorry, not the Sela, the Tzur element. The Sela is the Malchut that's above. So what would that mean in our own soul? It's our transcendent energy, our energy that's not concealed and blocked by the body and the ego. Okay. Now we take the same concept and we apply it. I'm giving you a head start for what he's going to say. We take the same concept and we apply it to the difference of Tiferes and Bina. Why? If Sela is in Tiferes, if Tzur is in Tiferes, then Sela is much higher and is in Bina. What's the difference between Tiferes and Bina? Tiferes is one of Hashem's emotions. And Bina is Hashem's intelligence. So let's use human intelligence and human emotions. And by a human being, because we use our experience as a metaphor to understand. Just like in our emotions, our strata of our emotions is where we mingle with things outside of us, because our emotions only get worked up in relationship to things. All right? We're feeling kind and giving towards something and somebody. We're feeling fear from what? From something and somebody. We're feeling compassion for something or somebody. Emotion or love. In other words, our emotions are very, very interactive with the world around us. Intelligence is a much deeper level of a human being, because the intelligence is the person as they are for themselves. To be able to be an intellectual, you don't need company. Quite on the contrary, intelligence, people who are intellectual like to be alone. They like to sit in a closed library. They don't like distraction. Emotional people are very social. They like always to be with people because that's the way they thrive. Their energy is an emotion. Emotion needs company. If you're alone and you're isolated, your emotions are very dead. Emotions thrive on interaction. So if we take the same concept with God, God's emotions are interactive with time and space, with the worlds. God's intelligence is above the world. So if we say that Sela, that Sur is in Tiferet, that means it's a level where there is more interaction. It's more embedded in the world, farther away from the infinite. Hashem's intelligence is where Hashem is for himself, closer to the Ein Sof, closer to the infinite. So it's the same concept, but on a higher level, because Malchus is much lower than these levels. But still, it's the same idea. If you want to figure out what the Sela is and what the Tzur is. So the question is, where were the Jewish people holding at the end of the 40 years? At the end of the 40 years, he's saying that the Jewish people were on the level of Sela. They were not on a level of Tzur anymore. Which means they attained, through learning Torah, they attained tremendous Bina, understanding. They ingested Hashem's wisdom. So they were able to climb into God's mind. And as a result of being within Hashem's mind, they were able to sense the Or Ein Sof much more, because the emotions of God are far more constricted within the world. But the intelligence of Hashem is where is above the limitations and above the boundaries. Since they studied Torah for 40 years, they were already marinating in Bina for such a long time. They were in a level of Sela, no more in a level of Tzur. That's where he's going with this. He's making it far more complicated by introducing the Cabalistic element of it. But that's what Chassidus does. It doesn't make things easy. But you can see but I guess like this, you're connecting to the godliness of it, not just to the human understanding of it, but to the divine element of it. Let's read it inside. So v'hinei apardes be'erach hakinuyim be'erach tzur pirish tzur b'malchus. Tzur is in malchus. Upirisheni, and the second pirish of what tzur is b'teferes. Tough is teferes. V'sela, and what is sela? Pirish kalas Moshe. Sela is the level of Kalas Moshe. What does that mean, Kalas Moshe? So he explains, Malchus, it's the level of Malchus, Kamoy Shehi Ba'atzilus, as she is in Atzilus. Remember we said in the Malchus there are two levels. Malchus as she lowers into the world, and Malchus as she is in Atzilus. Ubi Ma'ore Or, Ma'ora Or is a different Kabbalah work. Ois Tzadik, in the letter of Tzadik, Piddish, he explains, Tsur Teferes, that Tsur is Teferes, Vesela Bina, and Sela is Bina. So he gives a higher explanation for these two things. The Nimtza comes out, Lefiha Pardes, according to the Pirush of the Pardes, Shetzur Hu Malchus, that Tsur is in Malchus, Hanasa Mekar Libiyah, that becomes a source for the three lower worlds. Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, which are the three lower worlds. Malchus, Malchus Kololamim. It's the level of kingship that is very interactive with the world. Your kingship is the kingship of the worlds. And therefore, Shamayla Mamaster. And once godly energy comes into the worlds conceal and block and hide, even to the Malchut. Even the Shekhinah doesn't see anymore clearly. Even she has a certain dimming of her own eyes because she's lowered herself down into the worlds of time and space and of the limitations that block. Masha Enkein Sela, which isn't the case of Sela, who p'chinas Pnimius HaMalchus. It's called Kalas Moshe, as we said earlier. It's the Pnimius HaMalchus, the inner part of Malchus, Shenikra Kalas Moshe, which is called the bride of Moshe, Kamoishi Hi Ba'atzilus, as that stands in the world of emanation, in the world of Atzilus. The Eino Yared as Bibiyah, which does not descend into the three lower worlds of Biyah, Klal at all. And therefore, it's much freer, and therefore it's far closer and easier for it to experience this love, to experience this powerful divine love. But according to the second Kabbalah work, the Ma'ore Or, which explains Shetzur b'Teferes, that Tzur is in Teferes, and Sela is in Bina, Yeshloim are the same concept, but on a much higher level. Kiza, Ze'er Anpin, which are the six divine emotions, which Teferes is the main part of the Ze'er Anpin. Kiza Shayach La'olamais. Even though it's above the world, but it has a relationship to the world. Even though God's emotions are above the world, because God didn't create the world from his emotions, he created the world through his speech. Like it says in 10 utterances, God created the world. So he created the world through speech. But the speech was activated by his emotions. The emotions caused the speech. That's why we know that how many days are there in the world? How many days are there to creation? 6 days, and then Shabbat. But 6 days is the work week that God made the world. Why? Because there are 6 emotions. So even though God, the energy of the divine emotions are still infinite and too powerful for the worlds to handle, but the words that the emotions produced, they're already possible for the worlds to take. So God didn't create the world from his love, but he created the world through words of love. Words that were produced by love. And on Sunday, God spoke kind, loving words. On Monday, God spoke discipline words. That's why he made a firmament and he made a separation. On Tuesday, God spoke compassionate words. So the creation, the energy that makes direct contact with the creation are the words of God, not the emotions. Because the emotions would burn the world. But the emotions are the underlying energy that's producing the words. That's why 6 days corresponding to the 6 emotions. But what do you see from here? That even though the emotions are above the creation, they still have a relationship with the creation. And as a result of that, the darkness of there is some level of concealment in the emotions. But Hashem's intelligence, Hashem's head, Hashem's mind, Hashem's chachma bina das, that's above the world completely. And the level of the soul that corresponds to that is above the world completely. And if we can attain that level within ourselves, which the Jewish people attained through 40 years of Torah study, they were already in that place. They were above the world completely. And when someone is above the world completely, you don't have to hit him with a stick to get him motivated. It's like the child. Remember, we used to hear this always on who was it? On the radio. Which was it? They used to have this. This was just till recent. I haven't heard it in a long time. Maybe I just don't listen to the radio. But there was this guy who would always come on and say like words of wisdom, like on 1070 or one of these, like a short little something. And one of the things he would say was a Chinese proverb. Don't remove a fly from someone's forehead with a hatchet. With a hatchet, with an axe. If someone has a fly on their head, you use a little paper. And you don't grab a sledgehammer that you smash a big log with. That's not the right thing to use. So we have to know how to treat our soul. Now, here he's talking about the methods we use to deal with ourselves. When it comes to others, we for sure have to be super sensitive with this. Never employ pressure that's not necessary to inspire or to awaken someone. Give them what they need. Because when someone is a soft soul and you yell at them or you give them like harsh, even yelling doesn't have to be yelling in a loud voice. You can yell at someone with a conversation and saying something very softly, but you can say some very, very intense words. You don't need such intense words. If you don't need it, don't use it. Over here, all they needed was a little feather. The Jewish people needed a little feather to tickle them, to tickle their soul. That's all they would need. And Moshe implied the stick. That's the idea of the Maimer. As he says, Kizah shayach la'olamoy, ze'er anpin has a relationship with the worlds. Kiyim lo'yeh nevraim. He's explaining why the level of the emotions are a level of the divine that is more related to the creation. Because emotions, just like in a human being, if you are alone and there's no person ever around you, and no animal around you, and nothing around you, your emotions will dry up. You won't have any emotions because there's no body. Because emotion needs an outsider. If there are no creations, and regarding God is the same thing. If there's no creations, on who is he going to have mercy on? It says God is compassionate. On who? If it's only him, who is he compassionate on? On who is going to be kind to? And it says so in the pasuk, like it says in the pasuk, remember your compassion and remember your kindness, because simply it means because they are forever. But a deeper meaning is they relate la'olam, they relate to the world. Your kindness and your compassion are for the creation. Like there's another verse, Ki amarti olam chesed yibana. When God said, I want to make a world, chesed yibana, he built up his kindness. He revealed or developed kindness in order to create the world. So you see that emotions are related to the world. And therefore, it's susceptible to darkness. Emotions are susceptible to darkness because they relate to the world, so there can be some concealment of the world. And that's why the tzur is in the emotions. However, the sela is higher. Masha enken in bina. Why? Masha enken amoichin, which isn't the case of the mochin, the intellect. Einam shachis la'olamais klal is a level of godliness that's above the world. And that's what the sages mean when they say, Elechein, that's why the sages say, Alpayim shadna kadma haTorah la'olam. That the emotions of God begin with creation. But the Torah, which is Hashem's intelligence, precedes the world 2,000 years. Obviously, it doesn't mean 2,000 years. It means 2,000 levels higher. The Nimtza comes out. So what do you see? That conveys the idea that Chachma and Bina is an energy of God that's above the world, utterly above the world. The Nimtza comes out, Kisela hu b'chinas gevoa ma'od. What that means is that the level of Sela, of the rock, the soft rock, is very, very high. Like it says in Kabbalah. Now he aligned what he was saying before. According to Chassidus, he aligned it with Kabbalah. Because Chassidus and Kabbalah have to match. Because Kabbalah is the dictionary and Chassidus is the real experience. But the dictionary has to match the experience. So if you read in a dictionary that grass is green, so when you go out on the field, it has to be that grass is green. So Kabbalah has to match Chassidus. Chassidus is way beyond Kabbalah. Because in Kabbalah, you're only reading that the grass is green. In Chassidus, you're in the field, grazing in the green grass. That's the difference. People don't understand. People think that Chassidus comes to interpret Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a dictionary on Chassidus. That's really what it is. Kabbalah is that it gives you a map of the whole Seder Ishtalshlus. Chassidus is the godliness of all those levels flowing, opened up. But the Chassidus has to match with the Kabbalah. So he's showing you how the experience of Sela and Sur in real life fits with what it says in the books. Avahainu kitzur zadayin b'chinas b'nereo beisavua. The level of Tzur is the level of an immature soul that's still on the lowest level of soul. It's like we said earlier, a girl when she's still in her father's house, she's on the level of neshama, like we discussed earlier. The level of malchus, she's hidden in the world of bria. Omnam Sela, however, the level of Sela, Kalas Moshe, the bride of Moshe, who is already on a level of her being unified in Atzilus. And if so, there's no concealments over there. And according to the second interpretation, Teferes Shayach Adayan La'olamos, Teferes has a relationship with the worlds. Sharei Nikrak upon him Soviv Kalalman. Teferes, even though Teferes is above the world, but it's called Soviv Kalalman, it encompasses the worlds. Stated, Malchus is called Mamale Kalalman. Malchus fills the world. So Malchus is a much, much more immediate and embedded energy, an energy that's mamish embedded in the world. Teferes is still an energy above the world, but at least it surrounds the world. It surrounds it, so to speak, from the outside. It's related to the world. And therefore, it's also considered on some level related. However, Bina is above the world completely. Mashenkin Sela Bina, which isn't the case with Sela, which is Bina, who im ha-chachma, she is unified with Chachma, as it says, B'pchinas trein rein deloy misparshin. I'm sorry, this last piece that we're learning, by the way, this is heavy Kabbalah and heavy mysticism. So please excuse that it takes a little while to explain these. This is dense. This is an intense piece. And what he's saying is that Bina and Chachma are two friends that don't separate. That means Bina is connected to Chachma, and so what? And Chachma is where the Or Ein Sof shines. Chachma is a window where the Or Ein Sof, where the pure infinite shines. And if it shines in Chachma, and Bina and Chachma are connected to each other, so Bina is receiving the revelations of Chachma. So Bina, if you're living in the world of Bina, of divine Bina, you're looking out of the window at the Or Ein Sof. You're right front row seats for the Or Ein Sof. So if you fall asleep, you need a little feather to wake you up. Don't need you don't need to blast a gun next to the person to shake them up. That's all you need. And so if the Jewish people studied Torah for 40 years, so they've already absorbed the Bina, They've already moved from the backside of God to the front side of God. They see already. It's not much for them to see the Or Ein Sof, so we don't have to smash them with a stick. So now he's going to explain, and from now we turn over the page. Yuvana Yalkut. We're going to understand what the Medrash says in the Yalkut. Masha Kos of this, that it says, Nar, a youth. When a child, the Midrash says it's compared to a youth. Rabbi Maka Oisai, his teacher hits him, Umalamdoi, and that's how he teaches him. When a child, little children, they go to school, it used to be. Today's days, it's already, as we said, we're already living in Mashiach's times. So even it's translating even into the education system. In the last 30 years, it became absolutely, at least in the modern world, the Chiddush is even in the Hasidic schools. It became completely unacceptable for a teacher to hit a child. It's just unacceptable today. But 30, 40, 50 years ago, when I grew up, I got whacked. And I was a good kid. If I wasn't a good kid, I wouldn't be teaching you all of this. I was a good boy. But even as a good boy, I got whacked. The teachers were whenever they smacked us, they hit us, they and it was normal. That's the way it was. So, and it was so accepted as a norm everywhere in public school. And then you go back, it was a teacher. Kids don't behave. They get it. They teach you how to stick. So I'm just saying the reason why the modern world is that way, no more hitting, is because we are already in the days of Mashiach, and we've already worked the physical world so much that it became already, God already took away the stick from Moshe. He doesn't even send them to go with the stick. He said the stick is not here anymore. We don't even have, it's not necessary. Even in the inner city, even in Harlem, you have to figure out how to talk to the kids. So you're going to say, "Oh, come on, huh?" No. If the world is ready for Mashiach, it must be that the youth and people, you just have to know how to talk to them. But everybody is talkable today. Like it says in the end of the 40 years. But the Midrash is still talking the way using a parable from back then. And it says that when a child is young and he comes to school, the teacher has to hit him with a stick. But once you get older, sometimes the teacher needs to give a sharp word. Sometimes a teacher needs to speak a little harshly to a child who's misbehaving. Strong word, but that's it. You don't need a stick. That's what the Midrash explains, the difference between the beginning of the 40 years when Moshe was supposed to hit the rock and the end of the 40 years when Moshe was supposed to talk to the rock. What does it mean that he hits him? Similar to what it says in the Zohar, Pasha Shalach. So now he's going to explain what does it mean to hit in our own selves. When we find ourselves being immature and nothing works, we need to employ a little bit of a stick. So he's going to explain what that means. I spoke about this last week already. So the Zohar says, Sha'amar Resh Mesifta, that the Zohar says, talks about a lesson that was taking place in the heavenly academy, in the yeshiva above. That the head of the yeshiva above once declared like this. Now, what happens when you have you're making a fire? Remember we spoke last week? You're making a fire and you have a log that's not catching on. You're trying to make a fire. You're going camping and you want to get a fire burning and you're bringing, everybody's bringing wood and you're lighting the fire. It's not catching on. So what do? You need to take the pieces. You need to get smaller pieces. You need to get the fire. You have to break the log. I remember this year I went to the Desert Hot Springs. Not Desert Hot Springs. I went to Joshua Tree a few months ago when we found an Airbnb. And it was really cool. They had like a hot tub. It was the middle of the winter. But it wasn't a heated regular one. It was a hot tub that had a a fireplace that you put wood in, and you have to light the fire, create the fire, and that heated. And if you let it on for a few hours, you have to like kind of put it on at night. And then I needed it mainly for the mikveh in the morning. That was my mikveh. So I had this thing. The only thing I didn't like, it was amazing. It was middle stark desert in the middle of it. Like it was really, really like this thing. And boy, did it get hot when you let it on, because it was burning behind. If I put a lot of wood in, it burned all night long. And the time you couldn't go in. I had to like wait a long time and add cold water. As a whole, I couldn't go in. But the problem was that it had a smell of burnt wood. So, that was the only problem. But I remember when I was trying to get the fire going, the guy had behind this hot tub, he had a lot of wood. So you had big pieces of wood, and then he had two piles. A pile of big logs, thick logs, like chunks, like thick pieces. They were also broken, but thick pieces, like pieces like that, thick like this. And then you had a lot of thin pieces. Because I'm not good at making fires, I was using so much of the thin pieces till I got the fires going. But once it's going and you have a good fire going, or really there's a whole method of how you make a fire. You can put the big pieces in, or you put the little ones, I think, in an arch, and then you put the larger ones outside of it. You lay it like a teepee. And then you get the fires going with the little, you can tell I wasn't in Boy Scout camp. I mean, I wasn't with the Boy Scouts. So I never got the lessons on it, but the little bit that I figured out, you put the little pieces on the bottom, and then you put larger, and the larger finally catch on, and the larger logs give you a long-term fire. The little pieces burn out fast, but they get the fire going. So the Zohar said that the head of the yeshiva in Gan Eden said that just like a log, if the fire doesn't catch on, you have to take an axe and you have to break it into smaller pieces. So too a body, where the body is called a piece of log, where the flame of the soul, the fire of the soul is not catching on, you got to splinter the body. How do you splinter your body? There's a few things. Number one, you can't give your body every piece of chocolate cake at once. Because the more the body gets spoiled of getting all of its physical whatever it wants, it becomes it doesn't pay attention to the soul. So you need to control the body, limit its physical pleasure and intake, and slowly treat the body to start being sensitive to higher pleasures and higher delight. Because the body is not bad. The body seeks pleasure, but you can introduce the body to more refined pleasure. It just requires a little training. Just like I mentioned many times, just like the level of music, for instance. People train their ears to become really, really sensitive to fine music, and other people that have no refinement in their taste of music, and it's all just very coarse kind of sounds without any, and that's pleasure. So you see there's levels of refinement. Same as with food. You train your tongue to appreciate fine wines. Your little kid, all you want is Pepsi Cola, and that's the finest drink in the world. Slurpees. It's yuk, it's so sugary. But when you're a kid and you didn't develop your taste buds, but it takes a little bit of a restraint. You have to, you don't have to. People can train themselves to eat healthy and find all the pleasure in healthy food, but it takes restraint because you have to curb and if you don't restrain and your entire life are eating fast foods, and then you're given a fine dinner that's a fine, you just don't like it. Like little kids, you give them anything that has a little nutritional value, they don't even like it. They like junk, pizza and French fries. Yeah, but once it's not sweet, then it's so. But if you become more refined, then you realize there's much more pleasure in the fine tasting things, but you don't know that unless you're. So the body needs the same kind of a purification. When it comes to spiritual matters, it's so much more refinement. So you have to really, really work the body and not give it what it's physically immediate pleasure. So you can train it in to start finding pleasure in Thursday night study. Naturally, most people will find pleasure in watching television, empty, hollow stupidity. At the same time, you can turn your YouTube onto this channel and learn 2-3 hours deep, high ideas. And there's so many people that find pleasure in it. So many people would listen for 2 minutes and say, "Get me out of here as fast as you can." Like, it doesn't speak to you. Why does it speak to you? Because you have no sensitivity to anything more refined, anything more elevated. So that's one level of beating. And the other level of beating is that, as we learn in Tanya, that a lot of times a person has a very, very high self-image of themselves, where they think they're so perfect and so good. And that creates a certain smugness, a certain thickness of spirit. And you have to tell yourself that you're not as wonderful person that you think you are. So it's more of a psychological breaking. And we're dealing with healthy people. I'm not talking about people that are extremely weak and fragile. And if these people are trained to put themselves down, they'll be a total mess. So these people have to be trained how to encourage themselves. But we're talking about healthy, good, strong people who are not so fragile and are trying to pray and to get into spirituality, and it's not catching on. The Alter Rebbe says in Perek Chav Tes, in chapter 29 of Tanya, it's a whole chapter in Tanya, very powerful chapter, where he teaches you how to do a deflation of the ego. So you suddenly look at yourself and you say, "I am really, really ugly. I am really, really, really not a mensch. I am really, 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 really lowly. I'm really, 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 really very far from God. I'm actually so messed up." And the more you think that, and it starts hurting, you're actually cracking that ego, that sense of importance. And when you break yourself and you splinter yourself into little pieces, and it hurts you and it bothers you, that you're so imperfect and you're so not the way we should be, then you become less egotistical. And then when you'll meditate on godliness, you'll have a humble heart. And on a humble heart, you'll see the fire will take on. That's the idea of doing a beatdown, of using the stick. Not a physical stick. It's a mental rod that crushes the ego. And that's what he's going to explain over here. So it says like this, the Masha Kosa B'Zoyer Pasha Shalach. Sha'amar, it says over there, Reish Masifta, the head of the Academy of Gan Eden. When you have a piece of wood where the fire doesn't catch on, it needs to get a beating. The body that it does not take hold, the light of the neshama does not catch on the body. Also needs a beating. We need to understand. Till here he quoted the Zohar. Now he's beginning commentary. We need to understand. Why was the body compared to a piece of wood? Because everything in the Zohar is accurate. Everything in Torah is accurate. So if they're comparing a body to a piece of wood, it's not just because they're looking for an example of something that after you crush it, it receives the fire. It can catch, it becomes flammable. When it's thick, it's not flammable. And then when you crush it, it's because the human being is compared to a piece of wood. As it says in the pasuk, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, that a human is like the tree of the field. So once we find in the Torah that a human is like a tree, so the wood parable is actually a very good parable. And what is that? The idea is, the ksiv, it says, Ki adam eitz hasadeh, that the human is, in somewhere in Deuteronomy and Devarim, it says, Pashas Kiseitze, it says the human is, or in Shoftim, Ki adam, the human, eitz hasadeh is the tree of the field, shehim shalakasav, the pasuk compares, as adam, the human, eitz hasadeh, to the tree of the field. Just like the tree. If you took a piece of wood from a tree and you're trying to make a fire and the fire doesn't catch on, you need to slice the piece. the salik bein ahoira, and then the fire will catch on. Kach gufa, the same is true with the body. The loy salik bein ahoira and the nishmasa, where the flames of the soul are not catching on. Mevachenle needs to be crushed. Vayadei abitush, and through this banging salik bein ahoira, the flame of the soul catches on. Now I wanted to share with you something. So I was looking for commentary on this mimer because I was having a hard time to really break into this discourse the last 2 weeks when I was learning it. And so I found, because in this book, an Torah, there is no glossary, there are no footnotes. But in the Sefer, but Mamash Bashgacha Pratis, by divine providence, the mimer that I teach Shabbos in the morning is in this book, Lamed Aleph, Torah Shmuel Lamed Beis. And while I was, Mamash, see a divine providence. It just occurred to me. I would not. Thank God, I didn't even notice this. Last week Shabbos morning when I came to teach, I literally lost the mimer that I was teaching, and I knew it's in this book. And I looked 4 times back and I couldn't find it. I said, I can't believe what happened. So I checked all the other books around. Maybe I made a mistake because I started something the week before and I wanted to finish. So I took out the discourse and I started looking. And literally, and I said, I can swear almost that this mimer was here last week. What happened to it? Am I blind? I was getting frustrated. But while I was looking at discourses. And as I'm looking through, I see, hey, it's mamish what I learned Thursday night. So I noticed that the mimer from this book is from, here's my 2 books if anybody wants to see. The gray one is from the Tzemach Tzedek, the father. The red one is is Reb Shmuel, the son, the next Rebbe. So basically what I realized was that there was a discourse over here that was a repeat of his father's discourse. So basically what that helped me today, I remember today, I said, okay, if I want to have more commentary, maybe the son adds some commentary on his father's discourse. So I took out the Rebbe Marash's mimer and I looked. And actually the mimer was almost verbatim, word for word, no commentary. Words for word, his father's discourse. So I said, okay, that's not helping me. But what it did do was in the beginning, there is footnotes. And in the footnotes, it says wherever this discourse is repeated, wherever this, and all the discourse that are based on it. So I found another mimer from the Rebbe Marash in which he does add much commentary. But even more, I found the mimer from the Rebbe Rashab, the grandson. The Rebbe Rashab's discourse in Taf Reish Nun Beis, were there. It's interesting. He goes through the entire mimer and adds precious insight, a few places. They're very short little insights, which helped me glue the discourse together because I was finding that it was a little fragmented. I couldn't put it together. So by these little tiny commentaries, it was helping. But the main piece where the Rebbe Rashab suddenly takes off on his own and he goes into 2 pages, which is not to be found in anybody else's discourse, but it's his own, is when he gets to this part of Mevachenle. And I have to say, I read it and I wasn't happy. Because the Rebbe Rashab, literally, I was looking in the mirror. He was talking about me. He was so clearly discussing me over there, and he was taking me apart like a pew. I had a very hard time reading it, but I realized, interesting, from all the things he really, I'm not going to tell you what he said, but it was, you can look it up yourself. In any case, he was really, 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 really drilling. He was basically saying no excuses. No excuses. No excuses. He was talking about the excuse of, this is the way I'm created. And he was explaining the foolishness of that. How utterly ridiculous. You know, if you can't master your materialism, your physical, because this is the way you're created, you're an absolute imbecile. And he called it out just like that. And that's what happens. You learn a lot of Hasidus, and then you say, but what are you ever going to take this Hasidus and start becoming a mensch? That you take it actually to heart and you start really, really transcending your material world and start living godly. But then you say, what can I do? It's California, it's Los Angeles, it's a coarse world. This is the way I'm created, So, And he just right through. He says that is so a lame excuse. He says it's absolutely out the window, and he lays it out. So, but I'm happy that in the discourse of he doesn't do that. He just does very briefly. But it's amazing how I was just interesting how I was like thinking, oh, he's not giving. Why isn't the Rebbe Rashab usually give so much commentary? And he didn't. But when he gets to this page, 2 pages of Mevachenle, 2 pages of splintering the log. Okay, I guess everything is by divine providence. I had to read it. The Inyan bitush. So how do you do the bitush? What's the bitush? The bitush means the splintering of the log. Masha Kosov, is this what it says? Zivche Elokim, Ruach Nishbara. It says in the verse, the sacrifice to Elokim is a broken spirit. Leiv Nishbar, a broken heart, Vinitke, and a crushed heart. Okay, so what does that mean? What does that mean? In this verse, it speaks about a broken spirit and a broken heart. But before that, it says that a broken heart, God will never reject it. And it says that what's a sacrifice to Elokim? What's a sacrifice to God when you break your own heart? A broken spirit is called a sacrifice to God. A sacrifice to the Lord, Elokim. So he brings what it says in the Zohar. The Zohar says that if you look in Leviticus, through the book of Vayikra, and you look at all the sacrifices that are there are all mentioned, their sacrifices to Havaya. It never says, Adam ki yakriv korban lelokim. It says, but every korban, reach nichoach laHashem. It keeps on mentioning Havaya, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. It doesn't use the name Elokim. So the Zohar says, because sacrifices of an animal, when we bring sacrifices in the temple, it's to elicit divine compassion, which divine compassion is the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. There's only one verse that speaks about a sacrifice to Elokim. Elokim is the attribute of judgment. And the Zohar says, you know which sacrifices to Elokim? That's if you break your own heart. That doesn't help bringing an animal. If you sacrifice your own heart, a broken heart and a broken spirit. So the Hine, as he says, he explains by all the sacrifices, Nemar Karban La'avaya, it says Karban Ta Hashem. V'hainu, and what is that? Ki Karban Aloshin Kiruv. The word Karban comes from the word Karov. So bringing a Karban really means coming close, coming near. When a person brought a sacrifice, it elevated their consciousness to become closer to the divine, closer to God. And therefore, and Va'akirav, and closeness is L'Shem Havaya, to which, because God's, Hashem's name of Elokim is not where we can get close, because Elokim is harshness. So that side of God is you keep your distance. Havaya is Hashem's softness and compassion and kindness. So in Havaya is the idea of getting close is to the energy of love, which brings close. That's why by every korban it says Ishe LaHavaya. It's a fire to Havaya, to Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Ishe ubchenas eish hey. And Ishe comes from the word eish, hey, legabe Havaya. What that really means is the soul is called, we learned earlier, a kala, right? A bride. She's also called an Isha. Remember last week, we didn't speak about it this week. We learned there are 3 levels of a soul based on what it says next week in the Torah portion when it speaks about vows. It says first in her youth, when she makes a vow, it says she's in her father's house. The next stage says if she's engaged to be married. And then it says if she's in her husband's house that she made the vow. So we said these are three levels of a soul's connection to God. One is a single, the other one is engaged to be married, and the other one is married. When she's married, she's not called anymore Kala, she's called Isha. Like a Isha, Ish Isha. She's called a woman, a wife. Now the word Isha is Eish Hay. It's the fire of hay. What does that mean? It's when a couple are married and their love for each other is constant. She loves him, and the reason she loves him because we know that a husband and wife really are one soul, like we said by Adam and Chava, that Hashem took his rib, and separated her from him. Hashem took our soul and separated it from the infinite light. So our soul is constantly yearning to go back. That's what a korban is. A korban, when a Jew brought a sacrifice to the holy temple, he or she felt this yearning. However, that's all Havaya. Tzarech is korban gam l'shem Elokim. We also need to bring a korban to the name of Elokim. Why do you need a korban for the name of Elokim? Because a lot of times there are judgments that are on a person. A lot of times you're living your life and you're thinking everything is good, but there are chas v'shalom, God forbid, there can be dinim, there can be judgments on a person. And that's why you want to massage the name of Elokim. You don't want you want to massage the judgment. Right? Sometimes you have to face the music and you have to get close. You have to have a talk with someone who's upset at you. You can dodge for a long time, but it's not going to help you. Especially if the one who's upset at you isn't a very important person in your life. So you're going to have to figure out how to bring a korban, how to smooth it out with that level as well. How do you smooth it out with the name of Elokim? You can't just leave it as it is. So for that, Gam L'Shem Elokim. And how do you do that? When you do teshuvah and you have a broken spirit. A sacrifice to Elokim, Ruach Nishbara, a broken spirit. Leiv Nishbar, a broken heart, V'nitke, and crushed. And he says, what does crushed mean? Upirish V'nitke means as follows. The Yesh Daka V'nitke. Daka and Nitke is the same word. But Daka means something that is broken and crushed from within itself. Nitke is someone who became broken by some outside force. So what does that mean? There are people who are very, very, very soft and sensitive and broken hearts. Usually, let's say, God forbid, a person had a big tragedy. They lost a parent, especially if they're young, a yasim, for instance, an orphan. Orphan that loses a parent, especially if they're a child, they have a very, very broken spirit. That's why the Torah says, God forbid, you shouldn't ever insult an orphan, because they feel the pain so much stronger, because they have a much softer heart. So that's called a broken, or someone who's very poor, they can have a very broken heart. They always feel broken, and right. And then there is a very strong heart, very. So that's daka. Daka is something that is broken naturally. Nitke is something that on its own would be hard, but it was broken by somebody or something. So sometimes you can have someone who really is a tough person, but and you wonder, because they come back and they came home from work and you see that they're crying. Such a tough person. What happened? Oh, they had a fallout with someone who crushed them. Oh, that's tough. So that's called nitke. Nitke means broken by something else. So over here it says leiv nishbar v'nitke, broken by something hard. What does that mean? It means that when a person employs a method, a certain meditation, you're doing a meditation, but this meditation is a therapy to break the ego. It's not a fun therapy, because it requires being taking, what it really requires? It requires being honest with yourself and not buying the excuses. Because because we love ourselves, we always excuse every type of behavior that it's okay. There's that. So you have to be able to call a spade, look yourself in the eye and say, listen here, this is totally not okay. And when you're harsh with yourself, and to the point that it's going to hurt, you're going to hurt yourself. No one wants to hurt themselves. You're going to take a knife and cut deep gashes in your self-image, and it's going to hurt like hell. But sometimes that's necessary because it softens the human spirit so that the fire of the higher consciousness of the soul can kick in. Suddenly you'll find yourself having such a soft heart and you're feeling so much. First of all, you feel other people. Sometimes people are so selfish and they don't feel anybody. And if they get a good workout, a good breakdown, they suddenly become new people. They become so sensitive to people's suffering, to people's pains, to what people are going through, and they have an ear to listen and they're sympathetic because they soften the heart. You have to sometimes use very, very tough chemicals. It's not easy, and you have to be careful. Usually the people that are not supposed to do it are the people who do it, and those who are supposed to do it, who need it, are the ones who don't do it. So it's tricky because it's something that should only be done if in the right way. But in any case, what does it say? What is broken essentially? But what does nitke mean? It's broken through putting it under the crusher. It's basically working up in your own self a bitterness ala richuk. It's working up on your own self a bitterness on the distance, on how distant a person is for himself. On distant of what? How distant we are from Hashem. How far one is from God. This is also the idea where the sages say, this is what he brings this in Tanya, in this chapter I mentioned to you earlier, chapter 29. He says over there, the Alter Rebbe says, the sages say you should get angry at your evil inclination. If you feel your Yetzer Hara is, you should get angry at it. How do you get angry at it? The Alter Rebbe says, you yell, you look at the mirror, right at yourself, and you yell. You're not really yelling at you, you're yelling at your evil inclination, but you're yelling. You are wicked. You are despicable. You are evil. You are disgusting. You are The sages give up and say it. So the Alter Rebbe says you don't have to say it with your mouth. You can say it in your head. Not a good thing that your neighbors hear you yelling. You are disgusting. You are despicable. You are lowly. You are. The inyan bitush, and this is the idea when it says that when the person is a hard rock, this is what we're talking about. You're not turning on. Your fire of your soul is not going. You know all this information about God and his greatness, and you're not inflamed with him. So what's going on? Employ the pressure. But the inyan bitur, this is what it means when the Medrash says his teacher hits him with a stick. His teacher hits him, a youth, a young boy that doesn't want to study, the teacher has to whack him with a stick and teaches him. But the question is, why is it called a stick? If in the metaphor you're only speaking to yourself, you're not taking a stick and hitting yourself. Like Rabbi Reichik, Olav Shalom, would always say, remember? Rabbi Reichik would always say on his Rosh Hashanah speeches. I remember it, like hearing it from Rabbi Reichik like 5 times, maybe 7 times. He would say that on Yom Kippur, We go like this. So he would say that when you go like this, he didn't say it on his own. He would say it in the name of someone. I don't remember from who. He says, you're not supposed to go like this. You have to take a sledgehammer like that. He says, because if you go like this, the evil inclination thinks you're hitting him like, good job. You're like patting him like, which means, and it's joking, but it's not a joke. Because, we can go ahead and do the, you're not allowing it to like really penetrate. You're supposed to really allow it to go deep and say, I am not okay. I am not okay. And whose fault is that I'm not okay? My own fault. Don't blame anybody else. It's your own fault. Let me find an excuse why it's this one's and that one's, and then you're never fixing anything. And if you don't own up, that's what it is. If a person doesn't take ownership on their own things, they're never going to fix anything. And when we blame everything on circumstances, God knows all those circumstances and he created you anyways because he knows, he believes in you that you have the power to overcome that and to do what you need to do. And that's called, so he's now going to prove that hitting, you can hit also, hitting doesn't always mean with a stick. You can hit with words. Where do we find that? So he says, even though it's only with words. An example, it says in the beginning of Exodus that Moshe, one time went out to his brothers and he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew. Now the taskmaster was really beating him with a stick, with a club, with a whip. But Moshe says that Moshe turned this way and that way, and he defended the Jew, and he hit the Egyptian taskmaster, and he killed him. And then he buried him in the sand. The Midrash says, how did Moshe kill him? Not with a weapon, not with a stick. Moshe pronounced God's name. And by pronouncing the Shem HaMeforish, God's explicit name, he zapped him. He literally zapped him with God's name. He tased him. That was it. Moshe hit the Mitzri. And how did the sages know that Moshe didn't hit him? Maybe he hit him with a club on the head. How do you know that Moshe only spoke? Because the next day it says again he went out and he met two Jewish fellows fighting, and he says to one of them, "You wicked one, you Russia, why are you hitting your friend?" And these guys turned to him and they said, Who do you think you are? You're mixing in over here. Are you planning halahargenu ata omer, to kill us? Are you going to say like you did yesterday? In other words, we saw what you did yesterday, but when they said it to Moshe, they said, to kill us will you say? What do you mean? Are you planning to kill us? Which means, are you planning to shoot us? What does it mean, to kill us will you say? Will you speak? Because they witnessed how Moshe killed the other guy through his speech. So you see from there that Moshe didn't kill the person by physical force, but by applying a spiritual bullet. He shot him with a spiritual bullet, and that's how he killed him. So you see from here, and it's called vayach, he hit. So you see that with words, like sticks and stones won't break my bones, but words will, right? So, but words can hurt someone even more. So you see from here, he killed them with words. Okay. Pirish melamdoi. Oh, now there's a lot of Kabbalah over here. We thought we're done with it. You know what? I want to skip this for now, just because we're going to go in over here. We're going to be an hour and a half not lost in this explanation, which is, it's not understandable. But I want to just skip and finish this thought so that we'll so then we skip all the way down to the bottom. That's called hitting. And what it says about the teacher is, I'm just going to make a little synopsis of what he says in this space. It says the teacher doesn't only hit him. Teacher hits him and then teaches him. So in this whole piece, he explains what does it mean teaching him. Teaching him means inserting into our lower consciousness, our very limited, narrow consciousness, a spark, a download of Ein Sof, of heavenly truth. To give Malamdai means using a syringe and injecting. After you've softened the vessel, then you take a potent syringe and inject into the consciousness an injection of heaven, of heavenly consciousness. And when you do that, you'll wake up. The soul is ready to respond and to yearn for godliness. The beating down of the animal soul doesn't produce. And here's a very interesting thing. If you don't learn Chassidut, if you don't learn teachings from heaven, and you just that's the problem with Musar. Musar was another school that there is in Judaism to help a person refine their character. But it's primarily focused on the beat down. So if you only beat down and you don't empower, okay, so obviously there'll be a refinement, but the refinement will be a very immature, a very amateur refinement. The point of the beatdown and the cracking of the ego is so that you can introduce higher ideas, concepts from heaven. And when you introduce heavenly information into a soul, since our soul comes from heaven and remembers heaven, when you have teachings from heaven, it resonates in the soul. And when the soul is not covered by a thick, dense, materialistic block, if the soul is not dense with the thickness of materialism, the soul will respond with the correct response. And that is, it will go on fire. She will be a wife to God. She will be on fire for God. You know what? So let's learn two lines before we slip, because I think we can do a little bit of it here. It says that after the teacher beats the student when he's young, then upirish malamdai, then he teaches him. Al derech masha kasev David. It's similar to what King David says. Mikol melamdai hiskalti. From all my teachers, I became wise. Now he's talking specifically about King David. King David says, I wasn't wise, but I had a bunch of teachers and they gave me haskala, they gave me wisdom. They gave me sechel. So why is King David the one who needs to be enlightened? Why was King David who said, from all my teachers? And also, of course, everybody is that way. Anybody that becomes wise from all their teachers. And if you have a teacher who's not making you wise, why are they your teacher? Find a different teacher. What's the point of Mikol Melamda Hiskalti? What is he saying? So the answer is number one. It's King David who needs to become wise, because David represents the lowest level of spirituality. Because David is Malchus, kingship. And what did we say, kingship? Kingship enters into the narrow constraints of time and space and creation, which creates a blockage, which creates a limitation, which creates a very earthy consciousness. David is very much associated, the spiritual source of David is very much the divine energy that's contained in earth, in the lowest part of creation. So it's a very constricted consciousness. So David says, but how did I become wise? How did I get the Haskalah to know and yearn? If there's anybody who yearns for heaven, it's King David. Look into him. He's a soul that is unquenchable thirst. From where did he become? He needed to have a malamed. He needed a rebbe. He needed a teacher. Who was his teacher? He says, Mikol. Simply means from all my teachers. But the deeper meaning is, no, Mikol. From Kol, I became his Kalti. Kol taught me. He had one teacher. Who was his teacher? Kol. He had a teacher named Kol. Kol was his teacher. He called him Mr. Kol. I'm just kidding. The Kol man. Kolman. Who was this teacher? Malchut receives from Yesod. Yesod is called Kol. What's Yesod? Yesod is the last attribute from the masculine attributes. Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. So Yesod compared to Malchus is still considered infinite. And Yesod, he explains over here, is still in heaven. Malchus becomes the energy of earth. She becomes the soul of creation, which in general creation is called earth. Heaven is called the divine. The realm of the divine is called heaven. Kol is the power to transmit heaven to earth. That's why it says Kol bashamayim uva'aretz, that the level of Kol Yesod can bring heaven down to earth. Remember, for those of you who follow the channel, know that I gave a class a few weeks ago called 7-Eleven, Slurpees, whatever, and the Rebbe. So I was talking about the previous Rebbe, who's the attribute of Yesod, who brought spiritual, godly consciousness to America. He was the one who was able to connect the upper part of the hemisphere to the lower part, because that's the job of Yosef. Yosef is the one who leads the Jewish people down to Egypt. But not that we should become Egyptian, that we should bring our Jewishness into Egypt. We should bring heaven down to earth. Kol is that ability to transmit heaven to earth. King David, who is initially starting off as the soul of earth, says, Mikol, from the level of Kol, Hiskalti, I became wise. That means that Kol taught Chassidus, taught me heavenly teachings, so I can get my head out of the sand. I can pick my head up and look out and see the vast expanse of infinity. Most people never see that. Most people never look out the window of time and space. Their entire life, and in time and space, the narrowness of their immediate silly instant instant gratification world, the world of money and power and of the material physical world, which is nothing. Today it's here, tomorrow it's gone. Well, what's the value? It's nothing. So to open up your eyes and see, that's Kol. So King David says, Mikol Malamde. But here's the thing. When you learn a lot of Hasidus and you learn a lot of heavenly information, you do a lot of intake. But you don't have cracks in your ego. It's all thick and dense. So it doesn't go anywhere. It's like pouring, it's like planting a seed, but not having when the earth is not soft. So you can put as much seeds as you want on the floor, nothing's going to grow. You have to plow, and after you plow and the earth is soft, then when you plant the seed, you'll get a beautiful tree with fruits and everything. So that's the idea. After you have the teacher make beats and softens the earth, then you can put a seed of kol into the earth and it grows. So that's what he explains over here. From all my teachers, I've become wise. Pidish shahakol, that the level called kol, hu amalame, this is the teacher. The hinek siv, for behold, it says, ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, that simply it means, ki kol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, everything that's in heaven and on earth. But the Targum translates that kol connects heaven to earth. Eretz ubchenas malchus. Eretz earth is not just earth, but the attribute of malchus, which is the level of King David, is called earth. Shemachayo mahaveh, which enlivens and brings into existence this world. But because malchut enlivens and inspires the world, she herself gets constricted vision, gets a very limited perspective. Like it says, Va'ata machayas kulam. Va'ata is referring to malchus. Because it's in the word Va'ata, you have the letters, the aleph through taf, which malchus is the world of speech, the letters from aleph through machaya, you enliven as kulam, everything. So that's malchus. Malchus, there is concealment. Avo b'shamayim, but in shamayim, in heaven, ksiv l'cha Hashem agdula. In heaven, it says, what's in heaven? The sphirot that are above malchus, which are chesed, gevurah, teferes, netzach, hod, yesod, they are still connected to the Ein Sof. It's interesting. Earlier we said, when we wanted to say the lower level of tzur, the higher level of tzur, we said tzur is the 6 emotions, that they too have a relationship with the world, and therefore they're also blocked. That's when we were talking before. But now, compared to Malchus, the 6 emotions are considered expansive consciousness. And where do we see that? Because it says that Gedula, Gevura, Teferes, Netzach, and all the others, and all the spheros, L'cha Hashem, they are completely lost in the Ein Sof. L'cha, to you, God. They are in a state of elevation. They feel the Ein Sof. They melt into the Ein Sof. That's those are the sphere, including which? Including Yesod. But Yesod has another quality. The quality of Yesod is that Yesod is a communicator. Yesod is able to communicate this truth of heaven and transmit it to earth. That's why, because Yesod means bonding. It can bond and connect. Upidish, and what is Yesod? Upidish kol, hu mechaber. It attaches Shemayim va'aretz, heaven and earth. And unlike the Targum says, the achid b'shmaya v'ara, it holds on to heaven and earth. Pidish the achid b'shmaya v'ara shemechaber b'chna shemayim v'aretz. It attaches heaven and earth. One pirish is that it attaches, it unifies heaven and earth. V'oid yashloimar. Another pirish in the words the achid b'shmaya v'ara gevald. According to the second pirish, it downloads the echad from Shamayim into Aretz. In Shamayim, in heaven, you feel the echad. You feel the oneness. On earth, you feel fragmentation. Earth doesn't have such a revelation of God. So time and space make the world feel and experience itself fragmented and pieces and separated. So the unity is felt above, but not on earth. What kol does, it's the achid. It downloads the echad from Shamayim, from heaven, and downloads it that down here on the earth, we should also feel echad. Like it says regarding the Jewish people, that we are goy echad ba'aretz. We are a people that bring the echad into the earth. That's why they march in DC against us. Because the last moments before Mashiach comes, those who don't want to live in the echad, they want to live in the fragmentation, can't stand the Jews. My dear friends, there's no other explanation for anti-Semitism and for what's going on in the world the last years. It's one thing and one thing only. It has nothing to do with Palestinians. It has nothing to do with Gazans. It has nothing to do with Free Palestine. It has nothing to do with anything. It's all whatever. It has to do with one thing. The Jew is about to introduce to the world the oneness of God. Those who want to live in the oneness are happy with it, and those that are terrified from that oneness are dead, angry, and frustrated, and scared of the Jewish people. And that's what they're protesting. And that's why they're burning the flag, and they're burning the effigy of Netanyahu, and it's all subconscious. It's all because the unity is about to be revealed. The echad is about to be revealed. So we're learning over here the achid lashon echad. Shemamshech b'chinas echad. We draw the echad. Kamoi shu musig b'shamayim. The same echad that is understood in heaven. B'chinas ze'er anpin, in the 6 emotions in heaven, which is called ze'er anpin. The shamu l'cha Hashem agdula. There, everything is unified in the oneness. Because to you, God is greatness, which means it's surrendered to you. All the various different flavors, all the various different features of godliness, don't make it seem like there are many. It's all unified in the oneness. And what Yisroel is able to do, that oneness should be revealed on earth. Gamkein. And even though earth, the level of earth, which is called the Malchut, is that Malchus is not unified with God. Malchus, the opposite. Malchus enlivens the world, and even Malchus sustains and creates even things that deny God. Even things that are completely separated from God. And therefore the Malchus seems to be drifting away from the oneness. She's lost sight of the oneness. What Yisroel does is that Yisroel chases after Malchus and imbues the oneness into Malchus. Tells the Malchus, don't forget the oneness. Even as you go down to create the world, remember the one. And that's the idea of the Jewish people. We're all children of the Shekhinah. We're all children of Malchut. And what is our job? Goy echad ba'aretz, to reveal the echad in the earth through Torah and mitzvahs. Shenishmas Yisroel, the souls of Israel, mamshichim b'chinas echad, we draw down the one is gam ba'aretz, also on the earth. V'hainu, and the reason is because shemikol milamdei hiskalti, because Kol is our teacher. We have a very good teacher. Our teacher is called Kol, and it transmits to us heaven. Who is the Kol that teaches us? The Baal Shem Tov. Who is the Kol that teaches us? The Maggid. Who is the Kol that teaches us? The Alter Rebbe. Who is the Kol that teaches us? All the Rebbes. And they draw the Echad down. They bring the Kol down. That's because, by the way, who's called Kol? Kol is Yesod, and Yesod is called Tzaddik. Tzaddik Yesod Olam. That's the fascination of the Jewish people with a Tzaddik. Why are Hasidim so fascinated by a Rebbe? Because a Rebbe brings heavenly consciousness. That's the reason. Without that channel, we're lost. We're lost in the darkness of this world. The ability to be able to be focused in on oneness and live a life devoted and dedicated to a higher purpose beyond ourselves, to make God primary in our life. A Rebbe makes that possible. That's the tzaddik. That's Kol. Shahakol hu amalamed. That the Kol is the teacher. Elechein nasa mikol loch. And once Kol delivers its message into earth, it makes the earth be lecha to you. Instead of the earth drifting away from God, pulling into selfishness, pulling in more into separation, it switches the energy of earth from drifting farther into separation, and it pulls the earth back into oneness. To bring that to you, God is Gedula, Gam ba'aretz, on the earth. What's Gedula? Gedula is love. That our love is turned back to God, not to our selfish things. Our fear, our might, our strength is all to Him. Our compassion to Him. All of our features and all of our energies focused back to God. Gamke. V'zau masha kasav, and this is the meaning of the verse. Ani Hashem elamdach. I teach you, God says. Lahoyel, to help you. Here it says v'targum, but I looked it up. It's the Medrash in Pashas Emor. Maskidlach. In Targum, I didn't see it. What does that mean? Shazel derech sha'amar razal. This is similar to what the sages say. Divrei chachamim kidar boinois. There's a verse in Mishlei, in Proverbs, that says the words of the wise are like dar boinois. What are dar boinois? Shenikra darboin, umardea, umalamed. So in halacha, there is a lot of discussion in Rambam and in Gemara about laws of a lead, as someone who leads when animals are in a field and the animals are plowing. Animals are animals. So the one who's leading the animals and making sure that the animals don't get distracted by the grass and by the, like when you're going on a horse, a lot of times, if you ever went horse riding, back riding, what happens? The horse, gets distracted. Food over here, food over there. So you have to like pull by the reins. So for a big bull or big ox that's out there in the plowing fields, they have the stick, and the stick is pokey. And whenever the animal is not behaving, you poke him, and you keep the animal focused. And the animal continues to plow in its path. Now, the path of the animal usually is in between the mounds, because when you plow the earth, it creates mounds. So that you make a mound, and you have another mound, and then in between, you're pulling the plow out to plow. So it says that you have to lead the lead the animal, and the animal follows to walk, because the animal is going to want to go in other directions. So you use the darbon to lead the animal straight. So the verse says, I am your melamed. Now, the melamed doesn't only mean, melamed means in Aram, and one of the languages that they, I don't know, is Aramaic or whatever, means the stick that directs the animal to walk straight. So what is that referring to? We have to deal with our animal. And our animal gets distracted. By what? By all the material pleasures of this world. We are given a chance to live in this world for a certain amount of years. Every second is precious. Every moment is an opportunity to bond with the infinite and to bring the infinite down over here. But we get so distracted by every single physical distraction. So we need to have something that keeps the animal focused on, to go on the animal freeway and not to get off the exit. Keep it going. So look what the Midrash says. The Midrash says that why is the piece that directs the animal called a malmid and called a darboin? It's two names for the same thing. So the Midrash says, we're waiting for something. Stop. Came to learn Chassidus. Rambam. This is a good way to learn Rambam. It says the word darboin. Heshi, tell my fellow down there that another 10 minutes. Okay, because it says darboin. The word darbon comes from the word dar bina bepara. It delivers bina. The sages say, why is a darbon called, which means the piece that's used to lead the animal, why is it called a darbon? Because it delivers bina, understanding, into the cow. And it basically means a cow doesn't understand a different language. You got to poke him with that thing, and then he gets it. Umardeya is another word for it. It's called the mardeya. So it says, from the word mardeya, the word mardeya stands from three words. More, mar stands for more. More means a teacher. Da comes from the word dat. Dat means knowledge. Bipara, into the cow. Just like this darbon leads the horse, not the horse, the cow, to the mound. So spiritually, he's translating that. That teaches the cow. So we're not cows, we're people. Do we still need that? So he said, oh. In addition to our animal soul, that even humans have an animal soul, our neshama, our soul, our godly soul, is also called animal. What does that mean? There are souls of very, very, very high saintly tzaddikim, very high righteous people. Their souls are called human souls. But the souls from a lower world, which is called Olam HaBriya, the world of Bria, even though it's very spiritual and very high, it's called Zera Behema, the seed of an animal. It means it does not have the true level of human consciousness, of godly consciousness. And therefore it needs something it needs to be nurtured with human food to make it into a human mind. And that's the idea of giving daya into a para. It's directing the soul, even the soul has narrow consciousness. And it needs to be given. Earlier we were speaking that the narrow consciousness comes from the body. But here we're learning deeper. Even the soul itself can be of a constricted consciousness. And it needs a mardeya. It needs a darbon that brings das. It says in the Shema, the second paragraph of the Shema, we say, Moshe says, "V'nasati esev b'satcha." I will give grass in the field, lebehemtecha, to your animal. Simply, it means if you behave, God says, "I will give you rain." You're going to have grass for the animals. There's a much deeper meaning. Deeper meaning is God sends us a super soul. That's Moshe, and in every generation there is Moshe. These are the highly righteous individuals. In our generation, in the Rebbe, is Moshe Rabbeinu's soul. And he feeds grass to all the animals. All the souls of the generation are like cows. But Moshe has a grass. He puts out the grass every day. How does he give the grass? This is the grass. You can make it into a smoothie if you want. You can make it into but you gotta learn. You got to learn every day. You got to learn a few times a week. Chassidut, all this. This is what nurtures the soul. This is what gives daya into the soul so that they can know God. And then once, right? So as he says, and the Sham is the Bria. These are the souls from, we know there are four worlds: Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, Asiya. Now, most of the souls of our generation are from the world of Asiya. They're mamish from the lowest world. But even souls that are higher are called from the world of Yetzira, which are very high souls. And then there is even higher souls from the world of Bria. These are really high souls. But any soul from any of these three worlds are still called animal. Because they're created consciousness. Only souls from Atzilus are called human. And they're very few. Souls from Atzilus. And so for the lower souls, the only way they can know godliness is through, right? It has to be delivered to them through Hamnesham is the Bria Shenikra Zera Behema. Kishairish. And the point of when we say leading the cows that they should walk, it basically means to lead the cows to walk in their lane, not to go out of their lane. There is a lane. In the field, there is a lane. What's the lane? The lane is made from the mounds because when they plowed, animals are going and they're plowing. So when they plow, the earth goes up and starts to make a mound. So in the middle, it's smooth, and then there's mounds. So now the animals have to walk down the lane. They shouldn't go crooked. They shouldn't go on the side, which means to lead the animals in between the mounds. So he explains it spiritually what that means. If we are the animal, our souls, and we need to be staying in the lane, we have to be going towards the mound. What's the mound? The mound, he explains, is mystically the level of Yesod that gives us a consciousness of heaven. What did we say earlier? Yesod delivers consciousness from heaven. Yesod connects heaven to earth. And Yesod is called the mound, as he's going to explain now. Let's see quickly. Ki shaydish loshin tulamim huma loshin tail. Because of the plowing, nasa aretz talamim, the earth becomes mounds. V'loshin shenasa afar gavoya, the earth becomes elevated. B'makam echad in one place. V'namoch b'makam acher, and the earth is now lower in another place. V'alpia Kabbalah, and according to Kabbalah, tail nikra ha-yesod. Yesod is called tail, shahakol poinim boy, because everything turns to it. Yesod shenishpa boy mekola esas spheres, because the Yesod receives from all the 10 sephirot. Upidish mechaven apara letalmeh. What does that mean? That our souls should want to cleave to above Malchut. Malchut is the source of the creation. Our souls should be seeking heaven, should want to reach out to Atzilus. Ki mechaven apara letalmeh shetis'ala ba'atzilus, that the soul should rise in Atzilus. Ki hineksev, because it says, shesham olu shvatim shiftei ka. It says that the tribes, the 12 tribes, even the Shvatim, even the 12 sons of Yaakov, were considered, their level of their soul was not Atzilus. Their level of their soul was the world of Berea. Only Yosef was the soul of Atzilut. That's why he was so much higher than them. And that's why it says that they were all bundling sheaves, and their bundles bowed down to his bundle. Because he was at a much higher level than them. He was the tzaddik. Tzaddik Yesod Olam, Yosef. But the tribes are from the world of Bria. However, they have a source in Atzilus too. But they need to be inspired to connect to their source. They can't go there on their own. As he says, it's a little Cabalistic thing. I don't want to get stuck. I want to move a little further. I'm going to read a little fast. And I'm not going to explain everything here. So just bear with that. Just like in the world of Bria, there are 12 cows in Bria. These are angelic beings. I spoke about this Friday night by the Shabbat meal that we had here. I spoke about number 12 and number 13. So I mentioned that the 12 are the 12 lines where things connect. By a cube, there are 12 connecting points. Anyways, I thought I lost everybody when I was talking about it. Any case, the Zod Atzilus from Atzilus. Elechei Nikra Hayam, and that's why the sea split, Liyud Beis Kroim, to the 12 splits. They shakol shevet, so that every tribe should be able to connect from the world of Bria into Atzilus. Ya'ale b'mesila, also over there in the same lane. Shaloi, Sheba Atzilus. Ukamoy kan pirish kam machaven asapara, and nishmas the Bria, to lead the souls of Bria sheyes alu b'Atzilus, to go up to their source, l'sharshan and makoiran, to their root and to their source. V'hainu, and how do we lead the souls in their lane? Al yadei shemakol malam deyeskalti, through transmission, downloads, through the attribute of Yesod, that downloads heavenly consciousness to enable the Lias Pchenes Echad Gam Ba'aretz, like we said earlier, so that the Echad is fell down here. Vayidei Zanasa Aretz, and through that, the earth becomes the real meaning of earth. The real meaning of earth means longing, because the word Aretz comes from the word Ratzo. If you rearrange the letters, Ratzo means it's racing. The fact the earth has a capacity to race towards heaven. But we have to awaken. Or if we don't do that to the earth, then the earth has gravity and it just pulls down. But when you stir up the pot and you awaken the passion of the earth can become like a bride, like a burning female towards her husband, towards heaven. So every soul and every person has that capacity. But when we are still in an immature state, we first have to plow the earth, and then we can plant the seeds. So we have to hit it first. That's what the hitting was, is the plowing. However, once it's mature already, mishehigdel, once we reach already a maturity, what is going back to the midrash, miyasroi b'dvarim, then all the teacher needs to do, sometimes when the student is a little when the student is not putting in all their efforts into their studies, they need to sometimes get a sharp word from the teacher. But that's it. You don't need a stick. You don't have to break. A little reminder and a little refocusing. The Medrash uses the term, the teacher rebukes him with words. Umalamdoi, and directs him. Pirish mishahigdel, when you get older, represents a certain maturity, spiritual maturity. In other words, when we've already seasoned ourselves to experience and to connect already to the infinity, to the greatness of God, we are already attached in a level where heavenly consciousness has already been introduced to us. We're connected to the power. Dehina means a ruler. We're connected to the governor, to the ruler. In this case, connected already to God, close to God. So even when someone has already mastered and their animal soul is no more covering and blocking, and we've already attached ourselves and connected ourselves, we still have to constantly have some pushing us more than what we... In other words, it's never a point where it's just autopilot in Judaism. Even when we reach higher levels, you still have to employ effort. But the effort doesn't have to be painful. There is never a relaxed mode. Yes, because since God is infinite, there's always needs to be a task. There always needs to be somewhat of a driver that drives. It's enough to use words. And what words are used? If you're finding that your energy and love and passion of your soul is a little dim, it's not on fire, you learn a chapter Mishnah, that's all you need. All you need is to throw a little fuel onto the fire, which is a little Torah, and that should be enough to send the soul ablaze again with love to God. You don't need the stick. A little Torah is enough. So there's a verse that says, he brought this verse earlier, you created me back and front. And we learned earlier, when we are in an immature state, we're in the back level of the human experience. When we mature and reach already a higher level of consciousness, we're facing God face to face, but we're also in touch with our own face, our front, our inner self. Our pinimiyut is more available, is more immediate. We're conscious of our pinimiyut. But even though the word says achar v'kedem, even when our inner soul is shining and radiating, and we're in a higher and in a much deeper place, still vatashas alei kapecha. You put your hand upon us. Putting the hand upon us is, what does that mean? You still have to have some kind of a pressure. What does that mean? Loshen kapecha comes from the word kefiya. There has to be, in Israel, they're very, very terrified of what's called kefiya datit, right? That there should be any. But here we're learning that a person should always have some level of kefiya, which means because the moment you let go and you let yourself relax. No. Yeah, because but it's not just because you can fall, but because there's no end to how far. And when you start cruising, like you put on the car cruise, then you're going to stay on that level. You're not going to move. And so you always have to push more. And that's the idea of kfiyah dahainu. Shafilu b'pchinas kedem. Even when you're in a level of the front, hu b'chinas panim, which is in the level of face, dahainu mishehigdil, when there's already a growth and a maturity, tzarech liyas b'chinas kfiyah. You still have to apply pressure. Raka kfiyah hu b'dvarim. How do you apply the pressure on the soul? Through words. V'zau v'dibartem elasela. Now you can speak to the rock. Shana olav perek echad. Just read a perek of Mishnah on your sela. Ki b'Torah, because Torah yesh hakoach, because Torah has the strength. Sheyuchlu lavai lebchinas kala. Torah has the strength to turn us into a bride. B'chinas kol sanafshi, to awaken even a deeper passion. And that's why it also uses the word vatashes alai kapecha. Kapecha means kefiyah. Kefiyah means forcing, employing force. But kapecha also means your hand. And kapecha also means a spoon. So it says the Torah is called a kaf because it says asara hakaf. Because it says by the giving of the Torah, it came from God's hands to Moshe's hands. Hashem took the Torah from his hand into Moshe's hand. So therefore the Torah is called a hand. We received it from the hand. Because the Torah is given from hand to hand. And in the hand there are 10 fingers. And in the Torah there are 10 commandments. Right? Sarah Sadibro. And this is also Gevalt. Mayin ganim be'er mayim chayim. Going back to what we learned all the way in the beginning of the discourse. When the souls are in heaven, in Gan Eden, they're called the spring of the garden. Because the water over there didn't take much to bring the water. Like a garden has a water source, and the water is on the surface. It's beautiful. The soul is in heaven. Its juices are flowing. But when it comes down in this world, be'er mayim chayim, it becomes a well. When does the soul become a well? A well you need to dig. Over here, we have to dig our fire out from the materialism, from the coarseness of the body. We have to find our spirituality. It comes through a battle. It comes through digging. All the methods that we discussed earlier of how to break through the thickness of the material consciousness, of the worldly consciousness. How to break through. It's not easy. You got to drill till you get your things. But it becomes a be'er mayim chayim. And remember, we learned. The souls down here tell the daughters of Jerusalem. Jerusalem are the daughters of Jerusalem are the souls that are still in heaven, that have complete fear. Shchorani, I am blackened. Oh, I'm in a coal mine. I'm coming out. I'm black from dealing with this material world. But Vinava, I am so beautiful. More beautiful than you are in heaven. So Mayim Ganim Be'er Mayim. In other words, once we get our waters going, the souls down here, because once we bring the water out, we far surpass the level of the souls in heaven. Before it came into a body. Be'er mayim chayim, a spring, a well of living water, hu aliyah mamata lamayla. Because when it's a mayan, it's not called mayim chayim. When it's a be'er, it's called mayim chayim. It's living waters, much more powerful. Hu aliyah mamata lamayla is the soul's elevation when it breaks through the body. Al yedei aguf, through the body. But here's the thing. What did the Jewish people sing? It's beautiful. What did the Jewish people sing after Moshe hit the rock? It says, Oz Yashir Yisroel. In the end of the 40, they sang, and they said, Alu be'er, go up be'er. And Nula speak to her. And Nula answer to her, call to her. What they were saying is like this. We appreciate that be'er. Be'er is the waters that we possess in our soul. The ability to have mayim chayim. But you know what? Enula. In order to bring that mayim chayim, you just have to speak to it. Enula. Enula means call out to her. Don't need to beat. We're past the stage of beating. That's why they only sang now. Because when you're a kid in school and your teacher's still beating you, you're not singing. But when you reach a point where you're very graduated and you don't need a beating anymore, you still need some pressure. But you can self-discipline. You don't need that stick anymore. You don't need that breaking. That's a tremendous relief. And for that, they were singing. And they were saying, look at this. How do you elevate your be'er? All you need to do is speak to it. The Rebbe taught us how to do this. The Rebbe said that in today's days, we don't have to beat Jews. We don't have to tell them Musar anymore. They used to be in the olden days. The Rebbe says, all you have to say to a Jew, you're Jewish? Yeah, come, let's put on tefillin. And guess what? Jews respond. Wasn't that a brilliant idea? Before that, it was, yeah. The Rebbe said, you meet Jewish women, you say, come light Shabbos candles. Oh, no. You're Jewish, right? You're Jewish. What does a Jew do? You light Shabbos candles. And guess what? The message speaks to thousands of people, to millions of Jews. The waters are available. All the waters of the souls of the Jewish people, it's available. You just have to speak gently, with love. Anula. Speak to her. Speak to the Jewishness in the Jew. Speak to the juice that's there and draw it forth. And now we'll understand the sin of Moshe, when he hit the rock. Because by hitting it, he dragged down, he lowered their souls from the level that they were. They were on the level of the rock, of the soft rock, and by him hitting them, and he kind of employed the method that you employ to a tzur. Like we said earlier, the difference between the tzur and the sel. And he's going to explain over here why they were already on that level. Because they spent 40 years in the desert, and they were in that level already. But then he's going to say, but if so, why did God tell him to take the stick? He doesn't even need a stick at all. God told him, take the stick and speak. So he goes on to explain that. And the last piece, he's going to explain why Mashiach also has a stick. But Mashiach's stick is a much higher staff. First, he's going to explain, even by Moshe, he's going to explain there's two sticks. There's two staffs. One staff was meant to beat. The other staff was meant to talk. And Mashiach's staff is even higher. And we're going to have to finish this. It's only a little piece now to finish. Okay. But not for today. Wonderful.